So in the bass group, we're going to again go element by element here. And the first layer is this analog bass synth. And on each one of the bass tracks, I have EQ and compression. On the analog bass, the EQ has some boost in the low end, because this was a nice warm analog synth sound. And again, removed a little bit in that muddy range. And then also used a low pass filter to kind of scoop out the high end. For the compression, you generally start with a pretty typical bass compressor, one of these bass presets, and then I'll just tweak accordingly depending on the sound. Usually have a slightly higher ratio, medium attack and medium release, and then adjust the threshold to get the desired gain reduction for each element. Okay, the next layer is this high bass layer, and that's our organ layer. And the EQ on this, I really wanted to carve out some of the mid frequencies. And that allowed some of the fundamentals of that organ, since it was kind of a mid and a high layer, to really just be the only ones we focused on. Then compression, same thing. Standard bass preset here, and then adjust the attack, the release, the ratio, and the threshold depending on the sound. The sub-bass layer, the EQ really focused on the low and sub layers with some boost in the low end and then a low pass filter really only focusing on those low frequencies. And same thing for the compressor. Bass compression setting, focusing on dialing in mainly the ratio and the threshold and listening for the right gain reduction. Now you'll notice we have about 6 dB of gain reduction. That's a decent amount of gain reduction. And in this particular compressor plugin, even though the gain, the output gain or the makeup gain is set to 0 dB, we have an auto gain feature. And that automatically readjusts the output gain to match the reduction. Next is the distortion bass layer, and that's going to help some of the lowest parts of the bass sound better on all systems, including laptops and smaller speakers. So on this one, we had an EQ with a high pass filter that's going to help in that upper distortion frequencies. And then again a compressor, same thing. Basic bass preset with a higher ratio and then adjusting your thresholds and all the parameters to sound right for that sound. Now for the live bass track, again EQ, it's really going to focus on boosting a little bit of the low and mainly some of the high frequencies. That's going to bring out the string action, which is a really cool sound for the live bass and a very live sounding feel. Then a compressor with the same thing, adjustment on the ratio and the attack and the release and the threshold to get the desired gain reduction. Now there's a tuner in here too, but that was just left over from when we recorded the bass and we're tuning that instrument. And then last, on the bass subgroup track, another compressor to help glue it all together. And this one's not going to be a lot of compression because we're already compressing each individual element, but just some gentle compression to help glue it all together. Now you can see on most of the bass tracks I've got a compressor, and I'll usually go for a similar setting for the bass, and it's usually one of the bass presets, and I'm really focusing on a higher ratio, and I'll dial in the attack and the release, usually medium attack and a medium release, and then adjust the threshold to be just right. Now what I'm listening for is just enough compression, and you can get away with a little bit more, say around the 4 and the 5 dB gain reduction, but the main thing is to make sure you don't hear a pumping or a breathing or an over compression, and that's generally the parameters that I'll go for when doing bass compression. And then once I get enough gain reduction, what's sounding good to me, I'll definitely go back and check that against the kick, and that really gives me a good place to start.